In this demonstration, I will walk through using the Report Review Pane to improve a SAS Visual Analytics performance. This feature analyzes a report and then categorizes its finding with recommendations to help improve report performance and accessibility compliance. Let's go ahead and get started right with the demonstration. I will be using SAS Visual Analytics 2021.1 for the hands-on portion of the video, but the same techniques can be used in earlier releases starting with 2020.1, which came in the November 2020 release. This is the example report I will walk through and demonstrate using the Report Review Pane to improve the performance of this particular report. We can see this report has several pages. The first two pages make use of out-of-the-box page templates. And the other pages contain several objects, and one actually is used to validate some numbers based on a data join. Let's go ahead and pop back to the first page. Here we can see all of the data sources used in this report. We'll come back to that. Let's go ahead and click on the Review pane. Again, the Review pane is going to look at all elements of the report and categorize its findings into three categories. We have a high, which is represented by this little exclamation point, priority messages. We have medium level priority messages, and then we have low priority level messages. We can also evaluate the performance of the report, but before we click on this, let's go ahead and analyze the messages and take any actions we can to improve this report performances. The very first grouping is unused data sources. So it goes through and looks through any of the data sources that are associated with this report and lets me know if anything has not been used. In this particular example, I am not using the Megacorp time dimension data source. So instead of having to toggle over to the data pane and remove the data source, the review pane allows you to take action directly from the pane. So I can use the overflow menu and select Delete the Data Source Megacorp Time Dimension. Now we can see we've gotten rid of our medium priority issue. Let's go ahead and keep walking through these categories. The next one is aggregate data sources. The review pane has identified two aggregated data sources in this report. As the message indicates, it lets us know that aggregated data sources can affect performance and consider moving the construction of this aggregate data source to the data preparation stage. Before I go any further, let me show you a quick overview of the construction of this report. So here's a high-level look at the report design. We have Megacorp and Inside Toy, and we already got rid of the Megacorp time dimension data source that we're not using. But then we have two aggregated data sources. We have the Megacorp aggregated data source and the Inside Toy aggregated data sources. And then those come together and build another table called data join. These aggregated data sources and the data join are temporary tables that are created in the user CAS library every time the report is opened. And we'll take a look at how this can affect performance. So let's go ahead and toggle over back to the review pane. We're not going to take any action right now, but this is just letting us know something to consider in our report design and something that we can move to the data preparation stage if our performance is affected. Let's go ahead and move on to the next category. This is our data source count. The message lets us know that using more than 9 data sources is not recommended. We can see that I had originally 6 data sources added to the report, but I've already removed one. So now we're down to 5 data sources for this report. So no action to be taken here. The next category is join data sources. Here it lists the data join table that I mentioned earlier. And again, the message is warning us that this can affect performance. And we are to consider moving this join data source from the report to the data preparation stage. Again, remember the aggregate data sources and the data join sources are going to be evaluated for every user every time the report is opened. Let's move on to our next category. Object names. This is our largest low priority category with 17 notifications flagged. This is a low priority message, and it is recommended to provide meaningful object names and/or titles or use the alternative text so that assistive technology will use the more meaningful names. So let's take a look at how the review pane allows us to take action. Let me go ahead and click on the list table product line 1. When I click on the list table product line 1, we can see that when I click on it, it makes it the active object, and I could directly take action by changing the object default name, adding a title, or inserting alternative text. If I use the overflow menu, it says show title for the object. Once I click the show title, we can see that it is removed from this particular grouping. We can see that our message count went down to 16, and now I can add a meaningful title to help with assistive technology. If I wanted to match the other title style, I can go ahead and highlight it. I can see the font size is 18. Let's go ahead and get the color. I'm going to go ahead and copy this hex value. And then come down here and double click on this title. Change my font size to 18 to match the other. And make it purple and bold. Okay. So now we have one less message for the object names, and now our report has better accessibility compliance. I just happened to pick an object that was on the first page of the report, but if you pick an object on another page of the report, notice when I click on it, it takes you directly to that active object, and again, you can make changes. Here I'm going to edit the default name, and you can see that change has removed it from a low priority warning. Let's go ahead and move on to the next category, unused calculations. This identifies any user-created custom calculations that are not being used. So these are not things that come with the data source, but something the user has created from the data pane. To improve performance, we can consider removing these unused calculations using the overflow menu. I'm going to leave them for now. And finally, our last grouping are user-defined formats. And this is just letting us know that user-defined formats can affect performance, and to consider replacing the user-defined format with a standard format or adding a column in the data source directly so you don't have to apply a user-defined format. Okay, we can see that these report review messages have quickly and concisely analyzed the report composition for best practices, and not only makes recommendations on how to improve the performance, but also allows you actionable options such as deleting unused data sources or adding better object names. However, SAS documentation says it best when it says some issues in a report can only be detected when SAS Visual Analytics analyzes the report's loading time. This is when we can use the Evaluate Performance feature. The report is reopened and several aspects are monitored and categorized in the Report Review Pane. So let's go ahead and click Evaluate Performance. Let's go ahead and save our changes. And then the Evaluate Performance is going to reopen the report, and it's going to be making a note of the data loading times for all of the objects in the report. Okay. When that completes, we can see that our message count and alert level distribution has been updated. When I expand the data loading times and I hover over a particular object, we can see additional information, including the time it took to load. We don't have to hover over every individual object to get this information though. It's easier to use the Report Review Overflow menu and export this report to PDF. Now when I go ahead and click on it and open the PDF, we can see the time it took to load for each of the individual objects that have been categorized as either high, medium, or low priority. Some other things I want to point out in this PDF. We can see that the colors for each of the message levels coordinate to the bar at the top of the report, as well as the bullets in front of each object that's been identified in each of the different categories. As I scroll through this report, you can also see that there are additional report review categories that the report is tested against, but we can see this particular report has passed and no issues have been identified for these particular categories. Let's go back to the report and click on the Evaluate Performance one more time. Here we can see we have a different number of objects identified in the data loading times. When I export this to PDF, I can place these reports side by side. So here we have the two reports side by side. Notice the differences in object loading times. This is normal and to be expected. There are several reasons why these times can vary. Let's go over a few of them. The number of users currently in the environment could be different. Did I recently run the report? If so, objects that can will use the cache, otherwise every object will have to be re-executed. What time of day am I testing? Are there scheduled jobs running in the background in the environment? Any ETL jobs, report distributions? Are we testing in a development environment? Is it configured similarly to the production environment? Did the report composition change? Pages, objects, or data sources added or removed? And did the data volumes change? Was the data refreshed? Did the data model change? Were indexes or partitions refreshed? So let's go ahead and click on a few of these objects to see if we can find a trend on why some of them have longer data loading times. Okay, when I expand on the data loading times, I'm going to click on the high priority objects first. So when I click on the button bar transaction year 1, I can see that this is associated with the overlap report, which I know is being sourced by either my aggregate data sources or my data join. The next high priority object listed is the pie chart, which is again on the overlap, which comes from the aggregated data sources or the data joins. And then the cross tab. So we can see my 3 high priority slow loading objects are being sourced by the aggregate data sources and the data joins. So we know that the warning and the recommendation was to move the aggregate data sources and join data sources to the data preparation stage. So that could be one thing I can consider. The next thing is the list table that is actually on my data join validation. And this was a hidden page, but I can see it's my next longest running object. So perhaps I can consider getting rid of the data validation since it is hidden and it was really only a development need to make sure that I was getting all the numbers that I needed were accurate. Let's see. So the next, those were 2 list tables. Here we're looking at a line chart over time, and I'm not surprised by this. The Inside Toys has 34 years worth of data. Next, going to the button bar, this is a low priority. This is using a now calculation, so that's just calculating when the report was executed. Let's see the next one. The drop down again, this has more data, so it's only a low priority severity. The medium priority next is the gauge, and I can see that it is on my data join validation. So again, this is being sourced by my data join. Also another list table on the data join. So in looking at these objects that have been flagged as either high or medium priority, I have action I can take. I can remove the at runtime aggregate data sources and data join from this particular report, write some code, load it to CAS, and then use a static table to feed these slower running things. So before I make that change, I'm actually going to save a copy of this report and make those changes to see how our data loading times improve. So using the overflow menu, I'm going to save this as something else. Okay. The next thing I'm going to do, I'm just going to go ahead and get rid of this data validation. We can see it was hidden anyways. If I were to go to the live viewing of this report, we can see none of my users would see the data validation page. So I'll go ahead and remove the data join validation page, which will improve the speed at which this report opens. So I'll go ahead and delete that page. The next thing I need to do is go ahead and load a static version of the aggregate data sources and the data join. So I wrote some code to go ahead and aggregate Inside Toys and Megacore, and I went ahead and joined that, and I did that in bait SAS. So I'm going to go ahead and remove those data sources. And I'm going to use the review pane to do that, because instead of doing it from the data pane, let's go ahead and go to the join data source. And from the overflow menu, I'm going to delete this. So we can see it goes ahead and it removes those role assignments. So I'm not losing the objects and I'm not losing any custom styling I may have done to these objects, but I've just gone ahead, I've removed that data source and I've removed the assignments, the role assignments being used in those objects. And then the next thing I'm going to do now, it's moved the aggregated data sources here to the unused because they were only being used to feed the data join. So I can go ahead and delete them from either category. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that. And I'm going to delete the inside toy aggregated. And now that dropped it down. So I'm going to go over now to my data pane. Now we can see I started at 6 data sources. I'm down to my original 2, and I'm going to go ahead and add a data source. I'm going to add that overlap, which represented the data join that I coded off screen. And I'm just going to double click it to add it to this report. Okay, so now I just need to assign the roles to these objects. So I have the overlap data selected. If I had a different data selected, I would probably, you would first have to select the data source that you want to feed the object. But here, before I do that, I do know I need to do a few things in order to make this match. So my transaction year is actually a category. And then I need to do a quick calculated data item to get the right profit when I brought those data items together, or those two aggregated data sources and code together. So I'm going to call this total profit. And in the operators, I first need to check if something is missing. Oops, not on the data item tab. On the operator tab, I need to check if profit is missing. And then if it's not, I'm going to add the two together. So I just know my data from when working with it. And if profit is missing, then I only want to return order profit. Otherwise, I want to add profit and order profit from the two separate data sources. And I want that format to be a basic dollar with no decimals. And I'll click OK. All right, so now I can add the category as my transaction year. For if you want to see the roles, for the pie chart, my category is going to be product line matching, and the measure is going to be my total profit. For my cross tab, I have transaction year and product line, and the measure is going to be total profit. Now this particular one, it did get rid of the heat map cell visualization, so I will go ahead back and add that. Here it kept the color styling that I kept, so I do recognize the changes I made to the color palette. So here everything was fine, but when I removed the data and role assignment for the cross tab, I can see that my subtotals were not turned on, so I'm going to go ahead and turn those back on. And I am going to add a new cell visualization for the total profit. It is going to be a heat map. And my gradient colors should still be there. Yep. So I'm going to do the light gray and then the purple that I've already defined or had already used within my report. So now I'm back to exactly where I started. I'm going to go ahead and save this. All right. And we're going to go over to the review pane. We're going to rerun the evaluate performance, or run it for the first time, I should say. I can see from the summary we have no high priority items flagged, and in my data loading time, granted, I can see that the overlap is still pulling the transaction year and the crosstab and the pie as longer running, but this is the first time I've run the report today, and this is the first time the overlap data source has been queried, that I can tell, because I don't think my colleagues are using this particular report. So this isn't a surprise to me that these are still a little long running, with the button bar being 8.47 seconds, the crosstab 9, and the pi 7. So just to see if I get a faster performance, that once this data, if it were being heavily used by users, I'm just going to run and evaluate performance again just to see, after that initial first opening and everyone's in the report, if this were, real life, I wanted to evaluate the performance, and this was a heavily used report, it would be more likely that someone would not be the first user to open the report and hit that particular data source. Here, a little bit worse. Let's see how that button bar, a little 8.27, the crosstab 7.63. So we can see that we improved. The pi is no longer listed as a medium priority. The pi is now down to 6.97. Let me go ahead and export the PDF to take a look at these times. And I'm just going to get these reports side by side again. And so here I already have it up compared to when we had the 3 high priorities over here on the right. And this is when we had the aggregate data sources and the data join. We can see the 25, 24, and 22 seconds. And here we can see that our longest running object now is 8.27 seconds. So that's a huge difference than when we had all of those data sources that required to be run and executed at runtime when you first open the report. That's done for every user. So again, we're saving a lot of time by taking the recommendations and moving the construction of those aggregated data sources and the data joins to a data preparation stage, loading that data separately into CAS, and then building the report directly off that. Now, granted, some features and some calculations, you may need to use those, but as you can see, it did make a huge difference even in this small example. For more information, refer to the SAS documentation that I've listed here, or the blogs that I have listed, as if you want to get further into performance do's and don'ts for SAS Visual Analytics and debugging additional Visual Analytics report performance problems. I've listed some really good blogs here from my colleagues. So thank you, and check back with the Technical Insights and Expertise series for additional tips.